Thanks for coming back to another episode of Pitch It, a fintech conversation amongst founders, investors, and friends. I'm your host, Todd Anderson, Chief Content Officer at Fintech Nexus. And what we do is we take a peek behind the curtain. What motivates someone to start a company? How do investors make the right bet? What do accelerators do during and help enabling the process of growing your company? How do banks think of founders? Not to mention, we try to have some fun, and what you'll see is we'll also do some special episodes. We have some new features coming. So stick with us, and you'll get all you'll need to know about the fintech startup landscape. Pitch It is really a part of a larger podcast network here at Fintech Nexus. You can go to my colleague Peter, our co-founder and chairman, for Fintech One-on-One. You can subscribe to his feed, or we have our newest podcast by one of our writers, Isabel Castro, the Fintech Coffee Break. For everything produced by Fintech Nexus, you can check out Fintech Nexus Podcast, which is really our content fire hose. All shows, webinar replays, even in-person event content, not to mention our weekly news show. As always, we hope that you rate the show and write a review. I try to really take listener feedback seriously, and as it helps make the show better. You can also follow the podcast and all of our podcasts on the feed of your choice, whether it be Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen, or come directly to news.fintechnexus.com. Now, let's get on with the show. On today's episode, I talk with José Carlos, co-founder and co-CEO of Palenca. José and I talk, what are some of the core differences between the U.S. market and the Latin American market when it comes to fintech, the impact open banking's had on, say, a market like Mexico versus a market like Brazil, kind of where fintech sits today in Mexico. There was this great boom in 2018. How big of an impact did that really have on the everyday Mexican user of fintech products? What Palenca is looking to do, their journey, which is from originally lending now to a data and technology provider, investment capital, taekwondo, and much, much more. Before I get into the episode with José, just a couple of short PSAs. We have our annual Fintech Nexus USA, May 10th and 11th, New York City. Last time to get tickets is April 21st, so don't miss out. You'll get discounted tickets for the last time. Also, Pitch It. The semifinals will be April 26th and 27th. The finals, May 11th. So make sure you check those out. Semifinals are virtual. The finals will be in person at Fintech Nexus USA. And finally, if you want to sponsor an episode, sponsor a digital offering that we have. There's many, many digital offerings, or even sneak in a sponsorship for Fintech Nexus USA. Just go ahead and reach out anytime. Todd at fintechnexus.com. Now, without further ado, I present José Carlos, co-founder and co-CEO Palenca. Hey, José, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I like to kick off the episodes. If you can just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of what's been your journey in fintech to now, and kind of what brought you to starting the current venture that you're with.
Of course. My name is José Carlos, but my friends call me Pepe. I grew up in Mexico City, but almost my entire family has roots in a small town in Colima. I studied economics with a minor in finance, and that's where I discovered my passion for startups and hackathons. One day with thanks to one of these hackathons, I had the incredible opportunity to become the first intern at Uber for Latin America, which by that time was a big deal since Uber was only hiring experienced people with MBAs and backgrounds at firms like McKinsey. So I was thrilled to be working with such talented individuals, and like what I learned is more about the culture of execution, right? So during my time at Uber, I had a chance to work closely with the couriers in Mexico, and I was shocked to learn that many of them were renting their motorcycles for $600 per month, and when they could own their own motorcycle for half the price, right? So that's when I learned that most of Mexicans lack access to credit and struggle to prove income, right? So I made my co-founder Pierre, and which was working with drivers' data, and we decided to quit over and create our own financial product for independent workers. So that's the story. Like, I do not have a lot of experience in the market. Like the most experience I have is around startups and founding two companies.
What gave you that that passion to start a company yourself? I mean, you mentioned you're an intern at Uber. Many people I talk to on the show, they work in, either banking or some career for 10 or 15 years. And then they're like, all right, let me start a company, or I've seen this problem over, X amount of years. I'm going to try to solve it myself. But you clearly took that leap a bit earlier. Kind of where does that come from? Is, part of your family? Are they entrepreneurs? Kind of where does that passion come from?
Oh, actually, the opposite. So first, I truly love the problem. So I witnessed firsthand the problem of financial inclusion with my family in Colima.
Mhm.
Most of them, recruit to predatory loans. So this is why I started this lending business. And on the other hand, I love data, right? So it's okay. So how can I solve this problem using data, right? And when I saw this part in Uber, I decided to, as you mentioned, take the leap.
So, tell us a little bit more about the company. I believe it's pronounced Palenza,
Palenca,
and Palenka.
Palenca,
And
yeah.
so, what does that mean? The word, and where did you come up with the idea for the name? And then tell us, obviously, a bit more about what you guys do exactly.
Of course. So Palenca or Palanca means ladder in Spanish. So we're a tool that empower businesses and financial institutions to leverage data and to make better decisions. Additionally, we own the .com, and of course, it's better for SEO.
Yeah. It's amazing. The funny thing is, it's amazing how many founders I talk to that the company name comes from an easy website.
Exactly.
Because otherwise, you can come up with this big fancy name for a company, and the domain is not going to be there, or the domain or the name is just too hard to remember for everyday people. So the easier it is to put in a website, usually that's kind of where founders go. It's kind of funny how it works out like that.
So in the US, almost everything is connected in some way, and it's easy to obtain information about consumers. Like, for example, the credit score system is widely used to determine financial credibility with a hit rate of 90%. And on the other hand, 7% of adults have at least one credit product,
Mhm.
right? So when you look in Latin America, the picture is quite different. For instance, in Mexico, less than 30% of individuals have a credit score, and the average credit score is 500, which is considered from regular to bad. And the reasons for that is that there's no infrastructure for lending here, right? Which means that um, few financial companies are the ones that provide financial products, and the ones that really take that risk of lending a person with almost no information, they charge exorbitant interest rates. I've seen products that charge users up to 400%. You can, unfortunately, if a user misses a payment, they can end up defaulting and harming the credit score. Because I mean, like if you miss one payment and then you have 400% of interest and all rate, so the loan becomes like very hard to pay.
Yep.
And the thing here is that we started as a lending business and we face this problem, right? When we try to underwrite credit for gig economy workers, we try to use various tools. First, the credit scores, but like not a lot of people are there. Second thing is that we try to use open banking, but open banking does not work in Mexico, right? Because people do not trust to connect their bank accounts first, and the second, there's not a lot of information. We're a cash-based economy, right? So what we were doing is that we were using screenshots from the app. It's like, okay, so send me the screenshot of your app, and then we manually were looking at their metrics and then making decisions with that, right?
Wow.
So
That's
to
a lot of
solve
work.
this, yeah, not not very scalable.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we brought in another co-founder, Antoine, who developed an integration with Uber and other gig apps, like using reverse engineering and user consent. And basically had a competitive advantage in the independent sector while providing loans, right? But like scaling a lending business in Latin America is incredibly challenging. So we needed that, right? Distribution. We have to solve fraud and collections. But what we did have was great technology to underwrite, right? So this technology that we developed was Palenca, but we didn't know at that time, right? We just like built these connections. So that's how we started, right? So at the end, we pivoted, and right now what we do is that we connect everyone into the financial system, right? And then we provide visibility to financial institutions through two products. The first one is an income verification API, where Palenca makes it easy for consumers to share employment data. The second one is that we are automating collections from a borrower's paycheck. So the first thing is that now you have information about the consumer. And the second thing is that we reduce the default rate drastically, right? So if companies were charging 400%, even if now they can charge 40%, it's a 10x difference.
Yeah. So tell us, a little bit about, the technology itself. If someone has 5 different jobs, or they have, 4 different, they're an Uber driver, they work other part-time jobs. Does it matter if they have multiple inputs in terms of their job, or does what Palenca provide give a whole picture of, hey, this is who my income, and this is kind of the money, coming in. How does it handle that? And ultimately, how much are banks willing to then lend, or other lenders willing to lend to these types of customers now with this data? I mean, have you seen it jump 20%, 30%? Like what does it mean for financial inclusion now that they can plug into a tool like Palenca?
Sure. Well, so we have an API where the user interacts, and basically they can connect their income sources, right? If it's a formal worker and Uber worker, if they sell stuff via Clip, they can connect their accounts. We aggregate those type of data, and we provide it in a standardized way to financial institutions, right? So that's how it works. Regarding how financial institutions are using us, is that we are able, they're able to provide 50% more loans using our technology, right? Because
wow, that's a big number.
Exactly, because currently in Mexico, 90% of financial institution uses Buró de Crédito or Círculo de Crédito, which are the credit scores, and basically they don't have information, right? But whenever you can, for a person that does not have a credit score, now they can basically provide it with their ability to pay.
Do you think something like this tool that you guys have built will help potentially change or adjust what a credit score might be? Because, with this, with so much more information, someone who maybe was thought of as a credit score of 400, 500, but in reality their credit score is probably higher if the lender knew of all of these inputs with a tool like Palenka.
Yeah, of course. The thing here is like compare, like to the US. In the US, I'm pretty sure they use income as a variable to underwrite credit.
Hmm.
The thing here in Mexico is that they need to start using it, right? It's like how much this person is earning.
Yeah.
It's not that it's like alternative data like contacts and data from the phone. But absolutely.
So, there's been going stepping back a little bit. The last few years, there's been a lot of change happening across Latin America, and specifically in Mexico, related to the fintech law, and a lot of other innovation happening in the fintech market. As someone who's in the fintech market, kind of what do you see as still some of the main problems that exist for everyday Mexicans today, and how much has fintech helped the population so far? In kind of in your mind, as someone who's kind of living it every day.
Yeah. So there was a there was a boom in 2018 about like providing a bank account to adults. There were a lot of companies in that time, Albo raising a lot of money. But the thing is here that like 4 years later, um, the bank account penetration only grew 2%, right? And the
Wow.
thing here is that like neobanks are providing with like debit cards to the same population that already have debit cards. So I think that the major problem here is how are you targeting new customers to basically make a difference in providing a new bank account, which is like the entrance to the financial system, and then build products on top of that, like product which is a debit.
You mentioned earlier. You mentioned open banking. While it's not the same open banking in Mexico as you might see in Brazil, but did the concept of open banking help with what you're building, in the sense that companies and lenders and banks started to understand maybe APIs better and plug and play technology better? Did that kind of help lay maybe a foundation that you guys then came in after the fact and said, open banking doesn't seem to be working great here, but this is a tool that can work great?
Yeah, so the part of the open banking that we basically adopt is a part of collaboration and partnership, right? So let me give you an example. For example, in the US, you have companies like Argyle or Pinwheel that they obtain,
Mhm.
like the user's consent to access data by scraping or doing reverse engineering. However, this approach has a lot of problems. Like the conversion rate is very low, around 24%, and there are, like legal issues, right? So on the other hand, in the US, you have this big incumbent in the industry that is Equifax, right? They have the work number, which partners with payroll systems to buy data and provide revenue share for it,
Yep.
right? So let's say Palenca, like is like the prodigious offspring of the work number and Argyle, right? So we at the end, like the inspiration that we had from open banking in Brazil is that okay, so we have to partner with payroll systems to basically build a new type of infrastructure.
So when doing research for this episode, I see that you guys are in multiple countries. How different is how different does the product need to be? Maybe it doesn't, for Mexico or Colombia or any other markets that you might be looking into, Is each country, do you look at it as, all right, this is a new problem that we're trying to solve? We're bringing our technology, but let's adjust it for the market. Kind of how do you approach going into some of those new markets from where you started?
Yeah, so our main focus are countries like Mexico and Brazil, which are pretty much opposite in terms of financial inclusion. Brazil has done an excellent job in this area, with 85% of its population having access to financial products. And the central bank has implemented effective regulations for open banking, right? Where, like the banks open up, like the information, right? However, the information about workers' ability to pay is still necessary. So Brazil has the world's biggest economy after the US. And there are also other type of workers like pejotas and autonomous workers that basically are like 28 million people. So basically that's the need of the information about the consumers. On the other hand, in 2021 alone, the delinquency rate in Brazil increased to 17.4%, right? So I think I read this article from you guys from Fintech Nexus. So that's the opportunity right there, right?
So, as you've gone through from where you started to where you are now, you've been in programs like Y Combinator, I saw. You also won our pitch competition at our Latin American event back in December. What do programs like this do, especially for early founders who are still kind of figuring their way through the product, meeting other co-founders? How do programs like this help founders like yourself, especially ones that maybe haven't been around either fintech or financial services for 20 years? How do these programs help as you're trying to build and scale your company?
For Y Combinator is especially useful for Latin American companies because local funds, they're not that big. And, due diligence can take up to 6 months, right? And we don't have 6 months as a startup, right? So for especially these programs help you to raise money very quickly, to access new type of investors, and it's a signaling for them, right? They don't have to basically do a hard due diligence for pre-seed seed companies because YC already did it for them.
So, you've been a founder now for a few years. I think I saw that you guys started either in late 20 or 21. So it's been a few years now. What's one of the biggest lessons that you've learned either about yourself or about the company in the last few years as you've kind of started to grow and scale out what your vision is?
So yeah, be a lot resilient. So I've, I like this phrase that if you truly love the problem, you're going to solve it. So at the end, we started as a lending company. Now we are an API, but we're solving the same problem, but from a different angle.
What about a regret? I mean, do you regret maybe staying a lending company for too long, or did you need to get to a certain point that you figured, all right, this is the time to pivot? Like, what is, how did that process work, and do you regret anything along the way?
No, no regrets. I think like one of the superpowers of Palenca founders is that we move super fast, and I really enjoy the journey. And the other thing is that we're just getting started
Yeah.
again and again.
Tell us a little bit more about those that are around you. How big is the team today? Is everyone located in Mexico? Kind of tell us a little bit more about those around you and helping you build what you guys are looking to build.
We're 26. Like 90% of the company is based in Mexico City. The rest is based in Sao Paulo.
Okay.
I would say 70% of the company are mostly engineers that help build, maintain the integrations. Yeah, we have the other team of partnerships, looking to partner with payroll systems to create direct integrations.
In terms of raising capital, you referenced the Y Combinator piece. How did investors um, you know look at the problem that you were looking to solve? And what about the where you started to where you are today in terms of talking with investors? You were a lending company, now you're kind of a technology data providing company. How do they view that switch? And tell us a little bit more about the investors that you've worked with and those that you talk to.
Yeah, so regarding fundraising, you really have to explain the main difference between the US and Latin America. Because what Palenca is doing in LatAm is a binary change of first, you don't have information at all, and now you have information, right? So it's like a bigger market. And then you have to find someone that truly believes in your mission. So I've been very lucky to partner with um, three investors. I would say first one is 500 startups. Gilgamesh. The second is Gilgamesh Ventures, and the third one is Foundation. Those are like my top investors right now.
Yeah, we know Miguel at Gilgamesh very well. We're very friendly with him, and when it comes to an investor, I don't think you can have someone as good as Miguel with his connections, with his knowledge, and just overall his how his outlook is on fintech. He's just phenomenal.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I'm curious about the one interesting thing with the investor question. Obviously, what is the percentage of investors that you're talking to that are LatAm based versus US based?
I would say right now at this stage, 100% are investors in the US, right? They're
Interesting.
not locals. Yeah.
And I guess with that, how much is there, or how interesting are those conversations, given that are these investors super sophisticated about the LatAm markets? Are some new entrants into the markets? I'm curious, kind of that, of the investors in the US that are investing into LatAm, kind of where do they sit, and what are the types of companies that and interests that they have in the region?
Yeah. So one of our most recent investors is Foundation Capital, and they have experience in Latin America. And the second thing is that they're really sophisticated in the payroll space. They have other investments like Highline, right? So they also automate collections
Yeah,
directly
I'm
from
familiar
the
with Highline.
paychecks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, they like it, they love it, and like they're trying to look to another company that is solving kind of the same problem, but in other regions, right?
So we have just a few minutes left. I like to end a little bit lighter and with some fun questions. Do you have a favorite book, or what was the last book that you read?
Yeah. So the cold start problem from Andrew Chen. Um, I've read it, I think, 3 4 times because they have like actionable things that you can do within your company, especially when, for example, Palenca is facing a cold start problem with building coverage, right, around partnerships. So okay, so we want to partner with every payroll system, but until we partner with every payroll system, we're very useful to companies, right? If we cover with partnerships 1 million workers, I'm not interested like to a bank, right? So this book helped us a lot on how to scale and how to like create new integrations and strategy around the product roadmap.
What is what's your favorite thing to do to keep your mind fresh and not burn yourself out? Because a lot of founders try to work too hard. They don't sleep. They're always thinking about the problems, but they need to stay fresh. So, what are some things that you do to ensure that when you come into work with your team, that you're fresh and that you're focused?
I love martial arts. I practice Taekwondo. I've been practicing it for almost 20 years. And it helped, like for discipline, for meditation, and that's what I do. On the other hand, I try to go on vacation at least 3 times per year. Like disconnect, not bringing my laptop, anything. So
I'm gonna assume, since you're in Mexico, that your favorite sport is soccer. That might be a bad assumption, but is your favorite sport soccer, or do you have what is your favorite sport, and kind of what are some of the teams that you root for?
I like soccer, yeah, but I prefer Taekwondo and martial arts. It's not fun to watch them in the Olympics, uh, but I like it, like practicing and and what it means. It has like a higher end of discipline and like mentality.
Well, I'm sure there's probably a lot of lessons that you can take from martial arts that you can bring to business, especially on the discipline side.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite vacation spot?
Yeah, I would say it's Ubita in Costa Rica. It's like no one's there, missing like food, beaches, and like yeah.
And then last question, what inspires you? What's your biggest inspiration?
That's that's a great question. So it's really make a difference in like in the world. So again, I'm sorry, I always go back to my family, but like sometimes we will live in kind of like a bubble, and whenever you go out and you see how like a lot of like challenges, especially in emerging economies with poverty, access to basic services. I think like by doing this and by being a founder, I can make a small change in my country.
Well, Jose, or as you said,
Pepe,
you like to be called Pepe. I
Pepe.
appreciate the time, and I appreciate you spending some time with us here. If someone wanted to reach out to you, or they wanted to reach out to Palenca, how would they do that? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think if I say my email, I would receive 30 emails. So I would say Jose@palenca.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn with José Carlos Aguilar. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again for your time. I wish you and the team continued success, and we'll get you back sometime in the future.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.